The Islamic veil, or the hijab, is a very important tenet of Islam. It speaks to the high moral values that Islam wishes to inculcate. Join our discussion today on hijab and segregation.
इस्लाम कुछ भी हो जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Beacon of Truth, a live program in which we discuss a variety of contemporary issues relevant to today's young Muslims. To help analyze these subjects, we get the views and expertise of some guests and the general public. You too can get in touch with us with your comments and your questions. You can send us your questions via Twitter and Instagram using hashtag BeaconMTA. Today we are also conducting an online poll about the subject at hand. On social media, we asked you, does the hijab hinder a woman's ability to integrate into society? We encourage you to take part in this poll, and inshallah, we will share the results later on in the program. Today, I am joined by my two colleagues, Imtiaz Ahmed Sarah Sahib and Nabil Mirza Sahib, both of whom are serving as imams of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community here in Canada. Today's topic is hijab and segregation, and the viewers are probably wondering, why are three men discussing the hijab? But as the episode develops, you will see that many women were involved in the making of this episode who shared the woman's perspective on the hijab, and we will be discussing from the purely Islamic perspective as imams of the community. Now, the simple meaning of hijab is to cover. Humans started to cover themselves with whatever materials they had access to, and gradually this increased. And nowadays, when we first hear the word hijab or parda, we automatically think of Islam. But really, we should think of mankind and humanity in general. Whether you are a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu, everyone is covering, everyone is doing some form of the hijab or another. But it is just a matter of degree. In some places it is more, and in others it is less. Islam teaches us a very high degree of morals, ethics, and values, and it teaches its followers to maintain the highest degree. And one means to adopt that is the Islamic hijab. But before we begin our discussion, let's get a word on the street and see what the public is saying on this topic.
I view it as a symbol of one's faith, of them. Islam, from the way I've learned it, is about submission to God. So submission to Allah, which means God in Arabic. So the hijab is a symbol of submission to God, and also I view it as freedom, because in most cases the person is choosing to wear the hijab.
I think of someone that's dedicated to their faith.
Well, when I hear the word hijab, what I mainly think is a religious garb that women who follow the Islamic faith wear.
I just recently started wearing it, and recently meaning 2 years. So like my whole teenage life, I did refer to it as just a piece of cloth that didn't really mean anything. But recently, like, I have gained more knowledge, and to my understanding, it's more than just a piece of cloth. For me, it means a sign of modesty, some level of respect.
And it's definitely more than just a piece of cloth, as we just heard. The people, they've all shared their views on the hijab, but before going deeper into this discussion, let's take a little step back and go to the basics and discuss what does hijab really mean. So Imtiaz Saab, you can help the viewers to understand what does the word hijab mean, what does it mean literally and religiously, and also is Islam the only religion which has prescribed this?
Yes, Hanan Sahib, the word hijab is an Arabic word, has many different meanings. It means veil, covering, curtain, screen, mantle, divider, division, and partition. And religiously speaking, it connotes to covering of head and neck by Muslim women. And the word hijab has now been associated to Muslim women. However, the concept of hijab has deeper and profound meaning for both men and women. the wisdom behind this Quranic injunction is to dress modestly and practice chastity and refrain from anything and everything that may lead man and woman to an unchaste life. The Quranic injunction is for first men and then for women, and that is to restrain our eyes and dress modestly. And it is important to note that hijab is prescribed in Islam, but Islam is not the only religion that has prescribed hijab for women. In fact, religious history is filled with many instances where women are commanded to dress modestly and wear hijab. For example, looking at the Abrahamic faith in Genesis chapter 24, we find an example, a small story of Isaac and Rebekah, where Isaac and Rebekah, before getting married, they are meeting, and Isaac is going to meet with Rebekah at a farm, at a field, and she is working there with her female servant, and Rebekah sees someone coming towards her, a man, and she inquires from her female servant who this person is, and she says that it is Isaac, and she immediately grabs hold of her veil, covers herself, and dressing modestly. This is the message we get from this whole story. Mekhetza is a practice of segregation still being practiced in synagogues. There are many instances we find in the New Testament as well, where Christian women are commanded to dress modestly in 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 9, and we don't have to go too far to find example of hijab or dressing modestly in Christianity. We just have to look at the example of mother of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, Mother Mary as they call it. So she's always dressed in modestly and covering her head in pictures wherever she is depicted. And Paul has actually taken it to the next level in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 5 to 6. He is commanding, he's telling the Christian ladies that they must cover their head, especially when they're praying. And he goes on to say that if a woman does not cover her head should be shaved off. This is an extreme, of course, and teachings of Islam are not so extreme. They are modest, and Islam has prescribed hijab for men and women alike, and both have to dress modestly and restrain their eyes.
Now you said that it is prescribed for men and women alike. So Nabil Saab, there's this misconception that the head covering is not actually mentioned in the Holy Quran. And also, to be fair with women, the prescription of hijab is only for women. So what is the hijab of the men as well, if you could add?
Yes, we have just heard by Imtiaz Sahab that, the veil for the men was prescribed before women. But the only, the question that people always have is that if the veil is such an amazing thing and, is something which is modest, why men do not wear it? So I will be coming back to this question later in the question. But before even going back to the hijab, I just said that many people have this misconception, and hijab doesn't include the head covering. So we hear in the media, well, they say Islam doesn't have in its teaching the head covering, but it's only a cultural thing. But in fact, when you look in the Holy Quran, the word hijab, when it speaks about the veil, is never mentioned, and the word mentioned is the word khimar. For example, the Holy Quran says in chapter 24, verse 32, that وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ, that they draw their head coverings over their bosoms. So here the word used is khumur, which is the plural form of the word khimar. And even if, without going into the religious aspect of the word, let's take it to the literal aspect. Lane's lexicon says that khimar means that it's a woman's muffler or veil with which she covers her head and the lower part of her face, leaving exposed only the eyes and some part of the nose. So we see that, the literal meaning in itself had the meaning of head covering. And again, if you go back before Islam, men used to have a khimar too. They used to have a turban which would cover their hair, but that covering would go back to their back. And women, again, they used to have a khimar too. They used to have a certain bandana type that would cover their hair, and again, that bandana would drip it to their back. But the only difference is that Islam or the Quran says that the khimar should be dropped from the front, And again, we have so many other examples. The word mutakhammir is used for horses who from neck onwards are white, and for example, and the rest of the body is from another color. And it says that the horse is mutakhammir because it's as if its head is covered. So we see that it actually a teaching of Islam, a teaching of the Holy Quran, that head covering is mentioned. But again, when we evolve, it has been coined as the word hijab, right? So now, where we have spoken about the word hijab, why men do not do it. This is an allegation that we often hear. And Khalifatul Masih Rabi, the fourth caliph of our community, Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad rahimahullah, he explained this so beautifully. And he said that, this is actually a compliment to the chastity of women. Women are in danger from men, but men are not in danger from women. And that's what we see. We have a rise in assault cases against women. And there is always we are always trying to dehumanize women, but for example, I had statistic here, for example, a staggering $57 billion is generated by pornography. And just to give you, how big that is, this amount is, this is more than the combined revenues of all US professional football, baseball, basketball franchises, and exceeds the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC television stations. So these things are not helping women. It's making their life even worse. But we never hear people talking about who are against pornography, right? And again, and we have to remember that this is where the beautiful teachings of Islam comes, that you need hijab and segregation in order to protect those women.
Jazakallah. I mentioned in the beginning of the program that Beacon of Truth is a live program, and you, the viewers, can tune in and also send us your comments and your questions using the hashtag BeaconMTA. Many women, in fact, have shared their own stories and their thoughts about the hijab, and we can take a few of these comments now. This Tasneem Sahiba, she writes in that a few years ago when job hunting, I was going to several interviews, but not getting a job because of my attire. And some people even told me to take off the hijab. She says that, but we as Muslim women should not be intimidated by anyone. Pray, hope, and keep faith in Allah Ta'ala. Similarly, Sabiha Khullat Chima Sahiba, she writes in that as someone who's been wearing the hijab for over 10 years now, I've never experienced it to be a hindrance. It has always proven to be a source of attaining respect and equality. And Zoya Sahiba, she writes in saying that the ability to integrate into society comes from within, your personality and your work ethic. This is the key, and it applies whether you wear the hijab or not. And I'll take one more comment from Fariha Zafar Sahiba. She writes that as a Muslim woman studying in the media industry, I often stand out amongst others, but this has never held me back. My hijab is my ability to integrate in society. It is my reminder every morning that there is more to me than meets the eye, and that I will show the world that me. So, some people, they think that the hijab becomes the hindrance and an obstacle for women who choose to wear this. And this is also the question that we asked on our Twitter poll. So let's hear from the general public what they had to say on this.
I don't think it hinders integration or oppresses women. I'd say that at largest, it probably just, when you walk into a room, people get to assume a lot of things about your moral code and your morality. And I would say that that's probably the biggest hindrance that I experience personally, because you're kind of visibly Muslim, or you're visibly associated with a certain narrative, so you don't really get to shape that before people make that assumption.
Absolutely not. They do it because of personal choices. It's an inner thing. A lot of people think in this society that it's something that's forced upon women, but actually most of the time it is something that they choose to do, and it's kind of like an inner thought, and it's just a process that they go through, which makes them feel more comfortable. So it's not something that oppresses them.
For me personally, the way I've been brought up, my dad has never forced me to wear it. He has advised me as obviously as a father figure.
It could oppress women if it's being positioned in a way where the people aren't willingly choosing to do it themselves. So if a woman chooses to wear hijab, then she chooses to wear hijab. It's her own choice, whatever.
Now, in order to give a more context to this discussion, let's talk about the reality of society in which we're living. When we enter into our gatherings, we find that more important the gathering, generally speaking, the more the seriousness of the atmosphere, the more the layers are which are worn. For example, if you go to a business meeting, chances are you will wear a coat and a tie. But if there's a more special occasion, then you may add a three-piece suit. And even in professional gatherings, you will always find men wearing a full suit. The importance of that event is what reflects on the amount of the clothing, generally speaking, that people wear. But in the development of the Western society, we find a very different phenomenon. Why is it that only women's clothing has become less? If the argument is that it has happened in the name of progress, then why hasn't the men's clothing become less? You're never going to find a man wearing shorts to a business meeting, but you may find a woman in a skirt. And this has unfortunately become linked with modern life, that that women's clothing has become less. But maybe the real answer is that women will be judged more favorably if she fits the standards of sexuality which are set by men. So leading to this discussion, Imtiaz Sahab, what can we say, how have men changed the outlook of women in society?
There are different ways looking at this question. We earlier talking about, Nabil Sahab was talking about media. Media plays a big role in our society, and one of the biggest ways how men have changed the outlook of women in society is by objectifying women in media. And this has been explained in a theory called the male gaze theory by Laura Mulvey. And the male gaze is the act of depicting women in visual arts and literature from a male perspective. One is producer, man, behind the camera producing the piece. Even nowadays when we have women producing or camera women, they are actually keeping the perspective of man in mind and then producing the piece. And then the second is the male characters within the film or the piece they're producing. And the third is male viewing and gazing at the images. So all of this is being produced from a male's perspective, how man wants to see women, not how woman wants to be seen. And the psychology of male gaze is the same as the psychology of scopophilia, which is looking at images to arouse oneself. Objectifying women, Hanan Saib, has been taken to next level in commercial, in ads and advertisement. We have seen time and again women with very little dress in sports car ads or burger ads. I mean, Super Bowl ads. Time and again we talk about it. There is all this backlash on how it is inappropriate. It's not we not be able to see in family gatherings. So naturally men are attracted to women, and they come up with different ways and mean to objectify women. And the Holy Quran also speaks of this, the psychology of man. It says, زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. And it keeps on going. The beautified for men is the love of desired thing. And the number one on this list is women. So that's why men come up with different ways and means to sort of objectify women, to exploit women. And the male gaze theory is one of the aspects of looking at this question. Going back to your question, the Holy Quran, we believe the teaching of Islam, they are for everyone, for all times to come. And the Holy Quran spoke about this 1400 years back and commanded Muslim men that كُلِّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِم, that tell them believing men that you should restrain your eyes and guard their private parts, and that is purer for them. So the whole idea behind this is to be respectful towards women, lower our gaze and our eyes and restrain our eyes and protect them ourselves from immorality and impurity.
Now, we asked some members of our community, is the hijab a sign of oppression and submission? Are Muslim women forced to wear the hijab, or is it something of their own free will and their choice? Let's listen to what they had to say.
What you have to understand is that when a woman decides to wear the hijab or to wear the veil and be modest, it is a commitment between herself and God. There's no one else who is allowed to force her to do it or force her to remove it.
I don't think that the hijab is a sign of oppression or submission. I believe that it's a choice that most Muslim women make on a daily basis, and it's one that they continue to do because they want to, not because anyone or anything is forcing them to do it. For me personally, I know that it's a choice that I make every day, and it's one that I'm proud of.
I don't feel like the hijab has oppressed me, nor has it limited my opportunities. I think it has done the exact opposite. It has liberated me. Now people take me seriously. They talk to me and they listen to my thoughts without judging how I look, what brand of clothes I'm wearing.
I think it's a sign of liberation. I've never associated the hijab with oppression. To me, when I put it on, I was free from the world, from all the materialistic things that were keeping me down. And I just thought I could do so much more with a hijab on, because I wasn't being judged by what they saw. I was being judged by what I did and what I said.
So, gentlemen, we just heard the comments of some of the women, the reasons why they're wearing the hijab and how it's helping them. But there's this, sometimes there's this allegation that comes up, and Nabil Saab, you're from France, so maybe this is where it's more perpetuated, mostly by the media or maybe by some politicians, that they say that the hijab is just a means of proselytizing. It's a way to convert people. So is there any merit to this allegation?
First of all, where is the evidence?
Right.
We don't have the evidence. We've just heard the comments of the ladies where they said hijab makes me more free. So we are just assuming things without any evidence. And we say Muslims don't honor their women, they keep them in their houses, they don't let them go out. But when our women go out and have a voice, we try to shut them down, right? So we have to remember that we can't assume things. But on the contrary, what we are doing by these statements were done in the media. Recent example is of Mariam Pushtu, who was a lady, a student in France, who was elected as the president of the student union of the association UNEF. So now she was elected by the student. She came in the media, and instead of focusing on her words, the whole media spoke about her hijab. And what was saddening, it was that even the government officials, talk negative about it. For example, the interior minister said, that her hijab is a sign of the Islamic State. But he himself, in 2013, he said in a Protestant audience, he said, and I'm quoting, "I'm not among those who want to relegate religions to the private sphere. On the contrary, I believe they have their place in the life of the city." Take the example of Quebec right now. We have so many Muslim women who are teachers, in schools. But, and the Premier of Quebec, he says that there is no, we don't need an anti-Islamophobia day. And the first Minister of Women that he appoints, the first remark that she ever says is that hijab means oppression, hijab is not from our values. So we have to remember that who is proselytizing here?
Right.
Is it Muslim women or actually people who are doing that against Islam? And look at France. We have so many magazines, front cover magazines, printed out against Islam. And and these are not, the quality, people will say, there is not that much quantity, but what is the quality mentioned there? These are hostile, threatening magazines where, for example, topics like West versus Islam, the burqa, they will say, what is the truth about Islam? And the word fear will be used constantly in those front cover magazines. So this is where, I think government officials, they have to respect each and every member of their country. Because, we have to remember that when they hear these things, it pains them and it hurts them. And we have to remember that we all should respect the sentiments of everyone.
We have to take care of the sentiments of every member of our society. Now, this leads to the next question. You mentioned that hijab is a religious symbol. So should the government dictate to people what they should or what they should not wear?
I don't think it's progressive, to be honest with you. Not just hijab as a religious symbol, but religious symbols of all other religions should be allowed for people to wear, like kippah, cross, Jewish burqa, and Sikh turban. People have religious freedom, and in Western countries we have religious freedom. And in Canada we have something called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows every Canadian to openly practice his or her faith. And then the Article 18 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights assures religious freedom. Now, despite having these religious freedom in different countries, especially in the West, we time and again see that people, responsible people, elected officials, government officials, and governments calling for a ban on niqab or hijab. And they make the argument that it is a sign of oppression. To be honest with you, it is, quite frankly, a very flawed argument. Just as it is oppression to force women to wear hijab, it is equally oppression to force women not to wear hijab, and equally oppression not to allow women to practice her religious freedom. So quite frankly, this is an attempt to marginalize one group of society.
And I would just like to add, is it really necessary? Let's look at the statistics. For example, in 2011, France became the first European country to ban the burqa. How many Muslims was that focusing on? Less than 2,000. And that makes 0.003% of the French population. And according to some other statistics, it is said that only 367 women were affected by this thing. This is 0.00058% of the whole population. Netherlands, again, the state broadcaster NOS reported that the total number of Muslim women which are going to be affected are from 100. So what are we trying to achieve here? I think we're just trying to kill a fly with a bazooka.
Right.
And nothing else.
And this really resonates with the results of the poll. I mentioned in the beginning of the program that you can send us your comments, your questions, and today we're also conducting an online poll, and the question that was asked is, does the hijab hinder a woman's ability to integrate into society? So I have the results of that poll now. 10% said yes, that it does hinder a woman's ability to integrate, but 85% are saying that no, it does not, and 5% remain unsure. So it kind of resonates with what you just said, that it's almost a non-issue. It's using applying things from the government for this purpose. It's almost like a waste of resources. In fact, it could be allocated somewhere much better.
Absolutely, and some may ask that what is integration?
Right.
Zuri Anwar Ayyadullah Ta'ala bin Nasr Aziz very beautifully explained. Integration does not mean that you forget your religious value, your own values, and then start acting, behaving in a way that a normal person would do. You can hold on to your values, at the same time be an integral part of the society. That is integration. And become a productive member of the society. That is integration.
Jazakallah. Now, we have spoken about the function of clothing. We have spoken about the Islamic hijab as the physical veil. But another aspect of this discussion is the segregation of men and women in an Islamic society, which means that there is no free mixing of men and women. So let's take a word on the street and get the views of the public on free mixing versus segregation.
I feel like it should be necessary, and I feel like this is not wrong. I feel like we, men and women, should not always be interacting with each other and like having dialogue. Like, it's just, that's what Islam teaches us. We have to be modest, we have to always conceal, we have to censor ourselves, and so on and so forth.
By separating men and women, you can avoid like interpersonal problems. But I think that's more like just avoids the problem rather than actually solving it. Like, realistically, everyone who interacts with everybody should be civil. We shouldn't have to hide one part of the populace from the other to ensure they don't get injured. So I think segregation isn't the solution, it's more like an avoidance strategy.
It's hard to say, because obviously segregation would have avoided a lot of issues that we deal with in society in mixed environments where men and women are working together, because I guess that would avoid any like opportunity for discrimination. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a complete solution, because there are certain situations where segregation is not applicable. So I guess in those situations where it's unavoidable for men and women to interact, those events would still happen. And maybe a movement as large as Me Too would not have occurred, because I guess it would be more rare, right, if men and women were segregated, but those occurrences and those issues would still happen.
So in the backdraft of this Me Too movement and all these scandals and things that we hear on the news with men in power and how they're abusing certain women, perhaps that could have been avoided if there was a hijab and a type of segregation in the society. But what can we say? What is the ultimate purpose of segregation in this society, and perhaps a progressive society?
Hanan Sahib, I think it's important before we talk about what is the ultimate purpose of segregation, it is important to talk about why we need segregation in a progressive society at first place. Often we are painted a picture that everything is fine in this progressive society. Well, we know for a fact it is not. It is an undeniable fact that women have faced sexual harassment at many, if not at all levels of our society, whether taking a taxi or at the workplace or walking back from work or attending a party or concert. Time and again, we have seen women have been sexually harassed, and this has given birth to the Me Too movement. We have also seen in leaked videos where some men have bragged about their groping women, and also the fact that making unwanted advances. So it is a serious concern. According to Human Resources survey published in Canada's Occupational and Health magazine, Safety magazine, it said that sexual harassment at workplace has become an epidemic. This is a really cause for concern, not just for women, but also for men, because we all have mothers and sisters, daughters who are actually going out and being an integral part of the society as they are. They are contributing towards, so it is a cause of concern for us. And this has also inspired many different ladies to come up with different things which may ensure the security and safety of women. For example, the taxi service for women only recently launched in Toronto called Drive Her, and similar kind of service was also launched in London, England. Women only gym, more and more women joining a gym. Women only gym. And then Hazur Anwar Riyadullah bin Nasr Aziz, a couple of years back, he was addressing ladies, and he also presented examples for Safe Zone in Berlin at New Year Eve's party. And then a women only music festival happened in Sweden. So we see slowly trend and the idea of people accepting that maybe segregation is necessary. And we believe, as I mentioned earlier, that Islam is a religion for all people, for all times to come. And segregation was taught 1400 years back, and the promised Messiah ﷺ very beautifully prophesied that "Aa raha hai is taraf ahrar-e Europe ka mizaj," that slowly the mood and a mode of free people of Europe is coming towards, inclining towards Islam, and their pulse is beating like a person who is alive. So going back to your question, the ultimate objective and purpose of segregation is safety and security of women. It is also about giving them a proper and their own space. But I want to also highlight the fact that it is equally important for us as men to behave more responsibly. And it is to be respectful towards women. And the whole philosophy behind hijab and segregation, that the topic we're talking about, is to forge a society that is a pure and chaste society.
So, Nabil Sahib, just picking up on that, so obviously, as Imtiaz Sahib just said, the need is definitely there. So how do we practice segregation in a Western society where, the genders openly, they're mixing?
Yes, we all, I think all of three of us can relate. We went to universities, even at workplaces, we have to interact with the other gender, right? So what is the solution, And, as I've heard in the video, it was said that, segregation, how can we hide women and men, right? But that's not the true notion of segregation or hijab. If your principles are there, if your principles are firm and you're covering yourself properly, then men and women can interact. But I would like to explain this in detail with an incident, an amazing incident of the Holy Quran, where in Surah Al-Qasas, God mentions the incident of Moses ﷺ when he ran away from Egypt. And he comes at the water of Madian, and he sees men feeding their animals. And he sees from a distance two women, who are struggling with their animals. So he goes to them and he says, "Ma khatbukuma," what's the matter? Now, there is a lesson for us that, even though we have haya, we have modesty, but that shouldn't, stop us to help women, right? So there is haya, there is modesty, but you have certain principles. For example, Moses, alayhi, he didn't go and say, the weather is really beautiful, and he started, a long conversation, but he was, he said, "What's the matter?" And the two women, replied, also, they were, were really straightforward in the reply, and they said that لا نسقي حتى يصدر الرعاء, that we can't feed our animals until the entire flock of everybody else is done, because men were there, right? And they didn't want to go there when men were there, and again, we might think, that maybe these two girls were outgoing, and they were tomboys, but again, the Quran is so beautiful that it says that a lady came shyly and said, my father is calling you. So we have ethics mentioned, how in this progressive society, we as Ahmadi Muslims or as Muslims in general, how we should interact. We can, Hazuri Anwar, Allah Ta'ala bin Asir, someone asked him this question, and Hazur said, yes, on project work, you can work, but it should stop there. We shouldn't go on a coffee, on a lunch, on a dinner, because then obviously other doors will be open. So, so Islam is so beautiful, that if your principles are there, if you're firm on your principles, then you are allowed to meet the opposite gender. But again, you have to stand firm on your principles.
There's a lot of questions that are coming in. I mentioned in the beginning that you can send us your questions and your comments via Twitter and Instagram using hashtag BeaconMTA. We have many questions that have been coming in on this topic. The first question is from Adania Chaudhry Saiba. She asks that, how can one bring someone else who doesn't observe modesty into the beautiful blessings of wearing the hijab in a polite way or an exquisite way?
This is a very common question that ladies ask. First of all, in the Holy Quran, we're taught that لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that surely in the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad we find an excellent example, and how we see the Holy Prophet Muhammad has trained his companion, not just men companions, but also women companions. So the different commandments came, the Holy Prophet would gradually make sure that these teachings are instilled and they abide by these teachings. So similarly, same approach can be taken. Slowly, you have to set your own example first. Then the second thing is, one cannot force somebody to wear hijab. The third thing is that you have to show the beauty of the teaching that you're following, meaning the hijab. Why do you wear hijab? They show why you dress modestly, why it is important to do that. Once you show the beauty and the reason why you do it, slowly the person will accept it, and then it will.
And obviously, like you said, the practical example is there. If they see you're wearing the hijab and you're integrated into society and you're living a very clean and pious life, that's something that many people would be attracted to.
Absolutely.
And this is something which has resonated with one of our viewers as well. They sent in this comment saying, this is from Samar Mahmood Sahiba. She comments that it all comes down to your example. First, show modesty in your actions. Then, if you carry yourself with confidence all while wearing the hijab, others will understand that the hijab is not a sign of oppression and that it allows Muslim women to carry themselves with dignity.
And I remember, Hazuri Anwar Lajna had class with Hazur, and Hazur told the Lajna, that the Ahmadi women, that when you go out, you have to be smiling. You have to tell the world, and you're free, you're happy. And again, it all comes down to, as you said, practical examples. So I think we, as Muslims, we have a great responsibility to show the beautiful teaching of Islam by our own practices.
And this would alleviate many of the allegations which are leveled against Islam as well. Now, another question, this is from Samar Mia Sahiba. She asks that if the concept of head coverings is present in every other religion, then why is it that the hijab in Islam is seen as an oppression?
Yes, I'd like to give this answer by narrating an anecdote, personal anecdote. I was at a church for a conference where we had a question answer session. A Christian lady asked that why do Muslim women wear hijab? And then I presented the example of Mother of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, Mother Mary, and then I cited a few references that it's not just the teachings of Islam, it is the teachings of other religions as well, as mentioned by the questioner as well. So why do we are following the teachings of Islam and others have forgotten it? And the priest, before I answer the next question, the priest got up and he said, unfortunately, we have forgotten our teaching. And he was remorseful. And so that's what the answer is. Here, we have to also encourage our sisters and our mothers and stand in solidarity with them, because it is really a challenge, especially in this society where they are bombarded with allegations, this allegation, that allegation, and yet still they're holding fast to this Quranic injunction, that is to cover themselves and dress modestly.
And Allah Ta'ala would inshallah reward them for this, because they're taking it it's almost like a jihad on their part.
Yes, it is.
Especially in this society. Now, another question, it's a very interesting question. This comes from El Yusuf Saiba. She asks that I take my kids to swimming, and for my daughter, I made a special request if they can create an all-girl class with a female teacher. She asks that should I have done the same for my boys who are 5 and 3 years old?
Yes, where the Holy Quran has talked about how women should cover themselves, it also talks about where women they should not cover, they should be at ease. And for example, the example of father is given, husband and brothers and all that. And also God Almighty speaks about this in chapter Surah An-Nur, verse 32, which says, young children who have no knowledge of the hidden parts of women. So there is a leeway as well, but at the same time, it is good that she has used religious accommodation that we have in our workplaces and other places as well, where they give you the religious accommodation. She has used it, and it's also important to set an example for her sons as well, that rules equally apply to you. So if there is an option where you can have a male instructor, by all means you should avail that.
Yes.
And I think we should appreciate as well, the lady who asked this question, that she's trying to teach her kids from a young age, and this is a great lesson for all of us. We have to teach our kids to respect women, to honor women, and that starts from home. Just as for any other religious spiritual aspect, for example, Ramadan, we say that we should start inculcating those amazing habits in them. You can tell them to fast for 3 hours, for example. So the same thing. I think we have a responsibility as Muslims that we have to raise our men to respect women, and we have to do that again. By it all comes down to your practical example. I think this lady is doing an amazing job with her kids.
And even something like simple things, like for example, as Muslim men, you're not supposed to shake hands with the opposite gender. So inculcating some small teachings like that, so while they're growing up in that kind of an atmosphere, and they understand and the respect that they have to give over to their women. Now, the last one question that we will take, this is from Mahreen Saiba. She asks that how can we actively encourage the younger generation about the importance of segregation? And we just already touched on this topic. So we'll ask another question, that why is segregation needed if women are wearing a scarf? Isn't there equality between men and women? So if in the last 30 seconds you guys want to answer.
We already answered, it's not about equality, it's about protection of women. And when women are with women, they feel better. For example, how the taxi women only started. The woman said, I was in a taxi with the man driving. I was really, not comfortable with the question he was asking. But then after a few days, I was with a woman, I was feeling so free. So that's why, we have segregation in our events. That's for women to be more free.
Jazakallah, gentlemen. Now, we began the discussion today by defining the veil, and it means to cover, as hijab means to cover and to protect. We also discussed the positive outcomes that hijab can bring about, and when the principles of hijab are not applied, what the detrimental impact to society can be. We have heard from the various Muslim women that hijab does not hinder them in any way. Rather, it is a powerful means that grants liberty, grants freedom, and it creates a boundary against wrong advancements and wayward looks. And we also heard in the commandment of segregation that there is much wisdom, and if it is adhered to, it could create a more harmonious and a more respectful society. So Jazakallah Imtiaz Sahib, Jazakallah Nabil Sahib for this very interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you for tuning in and joining our discussion today. Please do send us your feedback and your comments at our Twitter handle, which is @beacon_MTA. You can also email us at beacon@mta.tv. Join us again same time next week at 1900 GMT on Beacon of Truth. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.
लाएंगे सदाकतें इस्लाम कुछ भी हो, जाएंगे हम जहाँ بھی کہ جانا پڑے ہمیں جائیں گے ہم جہاں بھی کہ جانا پڑے ہمیں